Harpreet, thank you for that wonderful introduction. Way too nice, honestly. And I'm really happy that you get to join this panel as well. So for those who are tuning in, I really wanted to put this panel together. DSGO was awesome in, being responsive to this idea I had. And the thought is that I wanted to bring together as many data science podcasters that I could find. Data science podcasters are in this unique area where we're speaking, many of us have spoken to over 100 data scientists, 100 professionals. Together, we've spoken with hundreds. And being able to condense that knowledge into a single panel and condense it even further into this conversation is something that I think is going to provide really unique insight. Most of the time, we're basing our information off of a few samples. If I'm perhaps a data science student looking to break into the field, or I'm looking to learn these new concepts, I'm just finding a few, like 3 or 4 people that I can go out and reach to. Across this panel, again, we've spoken to so many people that this condensed knowledge, I think, can really go a long way. So before I get into it, I should provide just a little context about myself in the podcast sense. As you mentioned, I love creating content. I've been doing that on YouTube. I also started a podcast called Ken's Nearest Neighbors, where...
All right, looks like Ken is frozen. Ken was just sitting there talking to us about his latest podcast, the Ken's Nearest Neighbors podcast. We'll give him a second to get his internet connection sorted out. But in the meantime, why don't we do this? Let's go ahead and let's bring on some of the other panelists and have them introduce themselves. So you guys already know me. My name is Harpreet Sahota. I'm the host of the Artist of Data Science podcast, the first and maybe the only self-development podcast for data scientists. I call this the Artists of Data Science because the artists are the audience, the people who are listening to the podcast. So there are people with the genius for finding a new answer, a new connection, or a new way of getting things done. So my podcast is all about making you into a well-rounded data scientist, to transform you from an aspirant to a practitioner to a leader, data scientist that thinks beyond technicalities of data and really understands the impact that you play as a data scientist in our modern world. Let's go ahead and bring up the next panelists, perhaps one by one. Let's start with the one and only Jeremie Harris, who is the Towards Data Science podcast host.
Oh, wow. I didn't realize I was the one and only. I'm so excited. All right. Well, hi, everybody. Thanks. And thanks, Harpreet, for that intro. Hi, everybody. I hope you're here. I'm going to step back. Ken, please. I think it's your turn.
Yeah, no, I was done with what I was saying about myself. I've gotten into this podcast game and I've learned so much from everyone that I've spoken to. And I'm just happy that I can learn from others who are in the space to be able to do this. So, we have Karen from the Women in Data Science Women in Data podcast, Jeremie from Towards Data Science. We have Sanyam from the Chai Time Data Science podcast, Data with Danny Ma. And then we also have Harpreet from the Artists of Data Science. So I wanted to just let you all introduce yourselves very quickly to give people a little bit more context about your story, as well as the podcast and kind of the goal of your podcast and your speaking things as well. So why don't we start with and kick things off with Karen here.
Yeah, thanks, Ken. As you said, I'm Karen. Hi, everyone. And I am an analytics manager at a company called Cardlytics. And over the years, I realized that the data carriers really were a well-kept secret. So yes, nowadays, everybody talks about data science. But when we are kids, really, we play at being a teacher, being a doctor, being a cook. We never go and say, oh, let's pretend we're a data scientist or a data analyst. And in fact, even when you've studied data science, or in my case, for example, applied mathematics to statistics, there is not a moment where you are ready to go and work into data science. And that's one of the reasons why I created the Women in Data podcast in partnership with Women in Data in the UK. The other reason was that I wanted to shed some light on some amazing women, amazing role models that work into data, because we are a minority, and it's important to give a voice to these women so that other women can see what we're doing in the space. So yeah, bringing more transparency on how data is used in different industries and shedding some light on female role models.
Wonderful. Everyone, be sure to check out that podcast. Sanyam, I'd love to hear. I'd love to have you introduce yourself to the crowd here.
Thanks, Ken. Hi, everyone. I'm Sanyam. I'm super excited to be part of this panel. So I work in machine learning. I work as a machine learning engineer. As you can see, these words are really something I'm passionate about, chai and data science. So that's how the name of my podcast came together, Chai Time Data Science. I have my Kaggle cup right here, but I interview people across different roles working in data science. So Kagglers, researchers and practitioners. I've interviewed, I think, almost everyone in this panel. If not, I'll fix that very soon. I literally just asked them, I asked Ken, how did he create content? What's his journey like? I asked Jeremie, he has an incredible startup, Sharpest Minds. Why did they create that? What do they do? How do they do it? It's just me asking stupid questions to really smart people, as you can tell. So that's what my podcast is about. It has a lot of Kagglers in it, but I also try to diversify outside of that. That's me.
Wonderful. Sanyam is one of the most humble people that I know. And so it's a nice contrast when you have me as the host who might be in the opposite direction. No, I'm just kidding. Jeremie, why don't you go ahead and tell us a little of your story as well?
Yeah, happy to, and really happy to be here. Thanks everybody for coming. So Sanyam, you so graciously introduced me. I really appreciate it with the Sharpest Minds thing. So yeah, I mean, I am the co-founder of Sharpest Minds. It's this data science mentorship program that's free until you get a job. So it's all based on income share agreements, and you have a one-on-one mentor who works with you through that process of getting hired. Apart from that, yeah, I host the Towards Data Science podcast, which we started off actually focusing our last season on like data science careers, the kind of business side of data science, exploring that a bit. And then most recently, we've been talking actually about AI safety and the sort of suite of problems that are emerging now that we're building AI systems that can do a lot more powerful things that maybe we didn't think would be doable this soon. And so we talk a lot about AI alignment, a lot about the strategies people use to kind of make sure the output of these models are still ethical, safe, robust, and good, and so on. So it's a mix of interviewing people from like OpenAI. We've had some folks at DeepMind. We've had some folks in the kind of broader data science AI ecosystem. So a lot of kind of different perspectives on data, whether it's from the business side in the earlier seasons or today with AI safety. And that's it for me.
Incredible. So Jeremie's been doing this for quite some time. I look at him as a veteran, and I learn so much every time I watch his episodes. I will also say before I have Danny talk about himself, Sanyam and Danny are calling in at crazy hours, super early in the morning, super late at night, and a special thank you to them for compromising their sleep schedule a little bit to be here with us today.
I'm always happy to have chai with you whenever you invite us. So tell us anytime, we'll be there.
Welcome. Wonderful. Danny, I'd love to, tell the crowd a little bit about your story as well and your experience with interviewing people.
Definitely. Thank you so much, Ken, for inviting me onto this panel. My name is Danny Ma, and I'm the CEO and co-founder of Sydney Data Science. And I also run the Data with Danny online community, and I think it's now an online data school as well. So I've been creating online courses for 2021. But my journey into this space of interviewing people, and I have to admit something here, right? Actually, Ken invited me onto this panel, but I don't actually have a podcast. So I have this big imposter syndrome cloud hanging over me right now. So please think of me as less of a panel member and more of an audience member as well. So
awesome.
Yeah.
Well, I think Danny's selling himself a little bit short here. He's interviewed and spoken with so many people in this community. I think we can all say that he's an honorary podcaster for that use case. Of course, he's also done quite a few YouTube live streams where he's had some incredible guests on. I haven't been invited to that yet for some reason. I don't really know. My invite must have just gotten lost in the mail. But
there might be a reason for that too.
Last but not least, the MC of this entire whole shebang, and last minute participant, Harpreet. I'm sure people know who you are by now, but they might not know that much about the Artists of Data Science podcast. So, I would love to hear the story there as well.
Yeah, definitely, man. Hey, thank you for letting me crash your panel. Totally just showed up and said, I want to join in on this, man. Sounds fun. So actually, before we had the technical difficulty, I had already just introduced myself and my podcast a little bit, but pretty much the Artists of Data Science is just I like to call it the only self-development podcast for data scientists, but I think all of our podcasts are really podcasts to help data scientists develop. So I touch on a wide range of things with the podcast. what I like to focus on more is interviewing authors, just because it gives me an opportunity to get really intimate with their body of work and with their words and their ideas. So I kind of liken my podcast as like impact theory for data scientists.
Wonderful. And from a very selfish perspective, one of the beautiful things about creating a podcast through my eyes, and I'm sure a lot of you have experienced this as well, is you got to choose the guests. You got to talk to incredibly interesting people on a very regular basis, and it is sort of a little bit of a self indulging thing where you get to speak and learn from some of your favorite people and some of the most interesting people that you can find. With that in mind, I'd love to get into a couple questions that we have here, and then potentially take some questions from the audience. The first thing I'd like to ask of you all is, from speaking with so many people within the data domain, what common thread do you see tying many of them together? Jeremie, why don't we start with you on this one?
Yeah, thanks. I think that's a great question. And my answer is actually going to apply, I think, beyond the data domain. It kind of applies to startup founders, people who do sports. Like, these are kind of the two areas that I guess I have the most experience in outside of the universe of data immediately. I think the main thing is not getting stuck, like people who don't get stuck thinking about certain abstractions as sacred, right? So think about a job description, for example. So people who don't let themselves and their activities be defined by a job description in a really narrow way, who find ways to kind of like transcend that, tend to succeed considerably faster and more than people who don't. So, when you find yourself in a new position, being tied to the abstractions around you, treating life's guardrails that are handed down to you as if they're blockers rather than recommendations, is really one of those features that I found super, super useful, both in the startup world and in data science. And when you talk to people who have really successful career arcs, that comes up over and over. They see a challenge, and they don't let the fact that they're like a data engineer prevent them from solving a data science problem. And they don't let the fact that they're not an owner prevent them from thinking like a startup founder. Ultimately, thinking like a startup founder, or a startup of one, which is ultimately what we all are. We have 100% equity in ourselves. I've just found that to be a really powerful recurring theme among people who I find really impressive.
Wonderful. I love that there's some mindset element there. This idea that the belief structure that a lot of these people have is somewhat similar. Sanyam, what do you think about this one?
Yeah, I would say I agree with Jeremie, but also to add to that, I feel passion is like a really common denominator between everyone. So I feel people tend to overestimate how easy it is to get started in data science, but then also you need a lot of passion to be able to continue at it. This field isn't strictly defined. Like, we see all of these job postings, different things defining it, but there's really no box I feel that people can put to it. So as I interview people, I've learned that the passion, they're really passionate, and you do need, sometimes people underestimate how hard it would be to continue at it. Not to discourage anyone, but I think the common denominator between everyone is how passionate they truly are about the field or the problems that they are solving.
I couldn't agree more. Something that I love when I'm interviewing someone is when you just start talking about a topic and you see them light up and they get so excited about it. And that's just what makes an incredible interview in my mind, is when you have people on and they're talking about the things that they light up about. Karen, what do you think on this one?
Yeah, so I can totally relate to everything that's been said so far. So I even have an episode talking about career resilience, and that links to what Jeremie said about, not letting yourself being defined by your job title. And this is definitely one of the key learnings I had. And the passion as well is something I see a lot among the guests. But if I have to pick up something, and that would be one thing that stands out for me among all the people I've spoken to, is this thing around learning and making time for personal development and career development. We all know that in data, everything, just like in technology, actually, everything moves really fast. And it feels like sometimes we are in this constant learning state. So really, that is what I hear the most. So how dedicated people would like to be, I want to say, because you will see that it's not always possible, but to learning, the importance of learning, yes.
I love that. That's something I think all of us really stress on the podcast and in our content as well, is creating this dedicated time. I mean, this field of data is constantly moving. It's constantly evolving. And if you think that you've figured it out, unfortunately, I don't think your career as a data scientist or data analyst is going to be overwhelmingly long, because you're going to get past, or you just have to develop this kind of evolving mindset and create that time for it. Harpreet, what do you think?
Not too much different from the other responses we've heard. I just find that the common denominator amongst everybody that I interview is that they're all interesting people, but they're interesting because they are extremely interested in a particular topic or a particular subject. Like Ken was saying, they just light up when they start talking about something, right? And the people that I tend to interview, it seems like they're constantly thinking about different things, different ideas, different people. They're thinking about all these fascinating things, and because of that, they just become a fascinating person to talk to. And it becomes really easy to speak to somebody who's kind of got all these ideas going on in their head, because they're just genuinely interested in a lot of things.
I love when you start getting into a conversation and you start bouncing ideas off of whoever you're interviewing. That snowball effect to me is it's like a flow state. It's almost like an elation feeling. It's addicting. And that admittedly, selfishly, that's another reason why I do this, is you have such deep conversations when you can talk with someone for an hour and a half about something that they care deeply about, or about who they are, or any of these things. Danny, you have anything to add to those?
Oh, these guys have taken up all the good points already. I'd like to add, probably whenever I talk to someone, so let me frame this up, right? So when I was moving into data science, working through like being a data analyst and trying to progress into a data scientist, I thought that everyone who was a data scientist was a genius, like on some other level, a next tier person. But after interviewing so many data scientists and hearing their stories, the common trend across everyone is that everyone has their origin story and everyone is just like us. So it's just hearing the stories of how they made it or how they achieved amazing things in their careers. It really inspires me every time I talk to someone new and learn about their journey, because you can think about it from your own perspective and kind of place yourself where they were at when they started and what they did, and you can try and learn from them as best as possible.
I love that, Danny. And that's something that's a perfect segue into our next question. So let's pin that thought for a second. I think that I'm really happy no one had mentioned the thing that the common denominator that I've seen, and that's that very few people go into this field in the same way. I think that a lot of students coming in, they say, "Oh, I have to do computer science. I have to do a master's degree in this. I have to do whatever the right path is," and there is no right path into this field. I've spoken with people who were gender studies majors in college, that were psychology majors, that were this huge breadth of background, and not just college, like where they learn their skills in boot camps or certificates or whatever it might be. And although that's something that's different among every guest, I think the broader topic it is a common denominator, that you can get into this field and your unique experiences and perspectives can create value in this field, maybe even more value. So hopping back to what you were just talking about, Danny, something that surprised you was that even these experts had a square one. They had this ground zero. Are there any other things across the whole panel that surprised you after speaking with so many people in this community? Why don't we start with you, Danny, and you can follow up with that thought, or if there's nothing to add there, we can pass it along.
I was hoping that you'd ask me at the end as well, so I have some time to think about what to say. I would say one of the most surprising things is just how I would call it passion, but it's not passion at the same time. It's something more driving underlying it, where everyone just wants to improve themselves. There's a huge growth mindset for every single person. So this is equal parts surprising as well as equal parts another trend that follows through for everyone else. So I would say it's surprising because when you meet with different people in the industry and as you're working, not everyone has that same growth mindset. But to have it come out so strongly from these people that you're interviewing is just really amazing at the same time.
You mean that, for me, realizing that for those that don't know what a growth mindset is that it's the belief that you can achieve something, the belief that we're capable of growth, whether it's academically, whether it's fitness, whatever it is, rather than believing that we're fixed in some specific, level of intelligence, for example. Harpreet, I know that we talk a lot about growth mindset. Are there any other things, that you'd like to add to that, or are there any other things that you found surprising across a lot of your guests?
I think it's awesome that a lot of the people I've talked to who have broken into data science or are in data science come from a wide-ranging spectrum of backgrounds, right? Obviously, there's the traditional math and stats and computer science stuff, but I've spoke to people who've got like anthropology degrees, art degrees, even physics, and all these other degrees that you wouldn't necessarily classify as quantitative. I think that's great because we need that kind of diversity of thinking in the field. It's beneficial for our teams to have this type of diverse perspective. But yeah, that's one thing that I love, is that people are coming at this from all sorts of different directions.
I love it. And that's what makes a good podcast too, right? A good episode is having some diversity of thought, seeing the breadth within this domain. I mean, data is in everything that we do now, and there's stories to be told around every single element of it. Some more interesting than others, probably. But to that point, Karen, what are some of the things that you've seen within your space in particular that were most surprising to you?
Ken, I am so glad you did not ask that question 2 seconds ago, because I was very busy sneezing. But so
we'll wake the audience up.
Exactly. So we've all spoke about, growth mindset and learning and all these things. And while everybody agrees that learning is important, what I'm the most surprised about is, how much time people actually have for that, especially on a daily basis. So how hard it is to integrate daily learning in your routine, or even weekly learning, especially during work time. So even if, sometimes some companies will say you have to block a couple of hours for development, it doesn't happen. It doesn't happen that often. So yeah, I find that very surprising, and this is something that I would definitely like to address.
Wonderful. No, I could not agree more. The more people I talk to, the more difficult I see it is for people to create these structures and systems in your life. And I find that the people that do have success in this field, they figured out a way to build some of that, or they've stumbled onto it luckily, or whatever it might be. Jeremie, what do you think?
I think this is a really interesting question. One of the things I found most surprising is maybe more about the field than the people in the field. And that's like just how little consensus there is about how to solve interesting problems, and therefore how much low-hanging fruit there still is. Like a decade into, data science hype territory, we still don't have answers to basic questions like, what is the right way to do data exploration? How much data exploration should you do beforehand versus after you've done the modeling? How do you separate these steps out? All that kind of stuff. And I've seen this trip people up a lot too, because there's a sense in which people who are entering the space kind of want something to hold on to as they're exploring it. Like they want you to tell them, like, here is the algorithm. Here's how you run your process. Here's the first algorithm to try, the first machine learning model. Here's how to implement it, whatever. And the fact that we just don't have answers to these questions is one of the most exciting things about the space, because as much as it might help people to break into it, if it were true that there were an established way of doing things, we wouldn't need data scientists, and the whole space would become just like number crunching and very repetitive. So I actually find this to be one of the most exciting things. It's one of the most curious things about the space, given the amount of attention it's gotten, the amount of really smart people who spend all their time figuring out how to do these things optimally. We still don't know. So yeah, I think that's my biggest surprise so far.
I love that. I'm constantly surprised how many more questions I find as I dig deeper than answers.
Yeah.
Right. Sanyam, how are you feeling about this one?
Yeah, I totally feel like writing on my wall, this is my work desk, that there is no fixed path. Everyone creates sort of their own path. And so I had the chance, I've been lucky enough to interview many top CAGLers and people who are really good at what they do. And the thing I've learned is, if I can rephrase the saying, the expert data scientist has failed at creating many more models than the junior data scientists would have, and they're just so passionate that they keep working at it. In life, I was told that it gets easier eventually. I don't think it does. You just get more interested, you keep leveling up, and you keep trying harder. So that's the thing. I was surprised. I assumed it'll get easier, but turns out I'm just getting more interested in the space, the problems.
I absolutely love that. I think there's something to be said about the journey and the experience there. I mean, that to me is the fun of it, and the fact that your interest grows, and you can meet the challenge to your level of interest and your ability is a very powerful learning skill as well. I think on a personal level, something that I've always been very impressed with is the creativity and the multitude of applications that are associated with data science now. We're able to integrate data science into our lives in ways that we wouldn't have thought possible 5-10 years ago. I mean, 10 years ago, you could argue that data science wasn't defined either. So that's a story for another time. But to me, there's something really incredible about seeing how different people are integrating this into their lives, into their projects, and really making a difference with data science. Adding truth to the world. I see that this field is some lens of truth. Obviously, data can tell whatever story you want it to. But the more we understand this, the more we understand the domain or the flaws in our analytic process, the more truth and the more value I think we can find overall. And so that's something, a unifying theme that has been surprising, but also really an optimistic theme throughout a lot of the experience that I've had in the space. So the next question I would really like to understand better is, what are some of the subtopics in the data science domain that you're most interested in having guests speak about on your shows in the next, in the foreseeable future? Jeremie, we talked a little bit about the security aspect, so we might as well start with you since we've had a little teaser associated with that.
Yeah, happy to do it. So I guess in my case, it's very geared towards where are powerful language models heading. So we've seen, for example, I think the key thing is, OpenAI's GPT-3 really showed us just the raw power that scale brings to AI systems. You take a pretty run-of-the-mill like 2018 transformer network, and then you scale that massively to like outrageous levels, and then all of a sudden you get not just like super high performance at the task it was trained to carry out, which is just text autocomplete. That's all GPT-3 was trained to do. But then GPT-3 can do a whole bunch of other things too, like translate between languages, write coherent essays, even write code, and so on. So the question I think a lot of people are asking right now in the AI safety community is like, how far does this go? As more and more labs now look at this stuff and say, oh, wow, we can just scale the crap out of our systems and get more and more generality. Like, where does this ladder actually end? We're gonna be climbing that ladder, especially over the next 2 years. We can expect more and more multi-trillion parameter models are going to be around the corner. There's a big question here about when this stops, if it stops, and then what this means for things like approaching general levels of intelligence and these AI systems that we don't yet know how to govern or control properly. So I think that the story of the next 2 years, seen through the lens of scale and seen through the lens of like multimodal models that can't just do language, but can also use images and language together and so on, that's going to be a really interesting story, and it's going to be pivotally important for humanity and the human story.
Yeah, there's so much to unpack from that, from the ethical issues, from the use cases, whatever it might be. We're really going to have to reevaluate how we govern these systems and what's right and what's wrong. And that to me is an interesting problem, but also a little bit of a scary problem. So
Absolutely.
I'm definitely going to be tuning into those episodes. The more you guys talk about that, because it's something fascinating to me. I mean, I'm not doing that large scale stuff in my current work, but who's to say in 2-3 years that won't be accessible to everyone? And we're going to, as a society, as a culture, as different countries, as different places, going to have to figure out how we feel about these types of things, which is another giant can of worms to unpack. What about you, Sanyam? What are some of the subtopics that you're most interested in?
I would just echo on that. I'm more interested in the how behind the deep learning, because I feel like software has been around for decades at this point, and deep learning is just coming around. So we're just figuring out how to productionize all of this. Like there's literally no strict set of rules or best practices here. So I'm really passionate about deep learning because this thing keeps getting better. And we were also just talking about this, right? As more and more people join the field, as they contribute to it, we get this diversity and interesting applications. So I feel deep learning is still quite underrated.
Wonderful. No, I agree. I mean, that's the beauty of, a lot of people would suggest that deep learning is, at the most basic sense, very simple, how it works. And there's still so much more that we can do with data, with whatever it is that goes into these models. And to me, that there's beauty and excitement that something so simple can still have such profound effects. Danny, what do you think?
I honestly forgot what the question was.
What are some of the subtopics in data science that you're most interested in understanding better?
So
in the next months, years.
Thanks, Ken. I would say sometimes my expertise is in using machine learning for tabular data, so data that a lot of businesses might have, and the business applications and how you might use them to solve problems within the corporate sense. So my interest is probably in what is beyond data science. Like, where does it get to a point where we stop talking about all the techniques and the tools and they just become different things that you use to solve problems? How do we progress problem solving in our space to a very advanced level so that like we can get rid of all the low hanging fruit and solve those problems first with very high efficacy? But then how do we move on to some of the more challenging problems? What sort of technology and tools might we have to develop and research to solve those problems once we've done all of the things which can generate all the value that everyone has told us about deep learning and data science and AI? Once we get that value out of the way, then we can start tackling some of the more researchy and more interesting topics as well.
Well, I love that. There's this huge functional element of what we do. And a lot of the times we get so excited about what's going to be next, we forget to apply what we currently can do and make it as useful to businesses, create as much value as possible. Karen, what do you think about this one?
On my end, it comes from a very selfish place. I've realized that, I use a lot of data at work. So it's all about analyzing data and making sense of it to answer business questions, just like Danny said. But then I never actually put any kind of thought about where does this data come from? How does it arrive in the database for me to use? And one of my mentor actually made a point telling me, Karen, you never talk about that on the podcast. And I felt kind of bad about it. I was like, yeah, okay, maybe we should talk more about, because, it's like the iceberg. So data science, data analytics, the tip of the iceberg, but everything that happens under, we never talk about it. So I would like to talk about that and learn a bit more about it, because I have no clue, and I have no shame in saying that I have no clue about what's going on there.
Well, I think that that's one of the most important things that we're going to have to start looking at, is that as the models get better, the best way that we can improve the models or make them more ethical or whatever it might be is to examine the data with more scrutiny, make sure that we're evaluating, essentially, like, that is really intimately related to people. And we don't want to forget that they're people. When they become data in a database, they're just rows and columns. And divorcing people from their data can be a kind of scary thing sometimes. And it's really important to keep those things in mind as well. Harpreet, last in the box on this one. What do you think?
Yeah, man, I think for me personally, the thing I'm most interested in is trying to understand how machine learning and AI can help augment human creativity, specifically through the application of deep learning for tasks in like natural language processing or other generative type of models. I'm just really interested in that space. So I've really been taking an interest into deep learning recently, after having mastered all the fundamentals, I will add. But in addition to that, just experimentation management and ML ops and stuff is always in the back of my mind too. That's something that I find super interesting.
That's awesome. I mean, you took a couple words out of my mouth there. I think the thing that I'm most excited about is using AI, using machine learning to enhance or augment our interpersonal relationships, right? We're on Zoom so much these days. We're in these, contained settings, but are we really able to, we should be able to use technology to make those even better, to understand people even more, to remember our conversations better. To me, that's something unbelievably powerful. This next question is going to be a little quick. I think we're we're going to be running a little low on time here, but it is a fun one. We'll start with Karen. Who are some of your dream guests for your podcast?
I was hoping you would forget about me for that one. I don't.
You can say
have
me. No, I'm just kidding.
You're not a one. I'm trying to interview women. But yeah, I don't have a dream guest. I want to, because data professionals are so diverse, as we said. I want to have a broad range of people that I interview so that everyone could relate to a guest. And that's what I'm trying to do, really get people from everywhere with any kind of knowledge relating to data and whatever they're doing in their job, just to come and talk and show what they're doing, really. So no dream guest for me. Ideally, the whole bunch of data professionals that are amazing.
No, I love that answer. I think, one guest is great to have people tune into one episode, but the whole idea is we're creating a story over time, and it's not just about one person. I absolutely love that. Harpreet, what do you think? I know you have a couple. We've talked.
Yeah, man. I mean, a lot of the people that were on my dream list have ended up coming on the show. So Robert Greene, James Altucher, Scott Young, who else? Annie Duke. All these awesome people who've written books that have
Dropper.
Yeah, exactly. Well, these are books that have, really impacted me and had a significant hand in building the scaffolding of my belief system. But I think going forward, a few people that I'd really love to get on the show. Ryan Holiday is one. I'd love to talk to him about Stoicism, and love to get Max Tegmark to talk about our mathematical universe. Sean Carroll, just because I've been really interested in physics on the side recently, and Nassim Taleb. If I can get some of those people on, I'll be happy. I'll be super excited. Not to mention a few other people that would love on the show: Jeremie Harris, Danny Ma, Cyan, and Karen. If I can get those people on the podcast, that'd be a dream come true.
I love it. I have a feeling we can make that happen.
Yeah.
Danny, how are you feeling? Who would you like to talk to in this space? Or even out of this space?
I would like to talk to Ken. Ken would be my number one. Outside of Ken, everyone else on this panel, of course. For me, I could list off all of the different authors that I love and all of their books, but if I had to narrow it down, I'd probably, I would love to have a chat with Nassim Taleb and probably Daniel Kahneman, and the two guys from Super Freakonomics. I think their books probably shaped how I think the most when I think through all of the different books that I've read. And having that sort of, that would just be really cool. That would just make it for me.
Unbelievable. Thank you, Danny. How about you, Sanyam?
Karen, I've already interviewed you, so and I'll be fixing the fact that I haven't interviewed everyone else, or a few of the others on this panel. So, but I feel like it's the Matthew McConaughey answer. This will keep evolving. Ask me in 5 years, it'll be a different list. But I also want to say that I'm really grateful that people have come onto the podcast and they've shared their journey. I called it season 1, and now again started season 2. So it's a constantly evolving list, but I'm sure everyone would agree. Whenever you're doing a podcast, you get this unique perspective into the field, into everyone's life. And I'm just also really grateful that I've had the chance to interview many of my heroes. Originally, it was called Interviews with My Heroes. So it's literally everyone I've had the chance to interview.
Wonderful. I think the value of being grateful for all the awesome people we have talked to. I mean, my thing is I have already interviewed quite a few of my dream guests, just like Harpreet and all of us. There's some beauty in that, and there's beauty in finding new people every day. You're like, wow, this is so exciting to interview this person. How about you, Jeremie?
Yeah, I guess I'll be the original one to say, of course, everybody on the panel right now. But I will add, because I'm especially interested in the future of AI and I don't mean like AI and consciousness, but to the fundamental connection between intelligence, information processing, and what it's like to have subjective experience. I'd love to talk to Sam Altman. The CEO of OpenAI, just about his decision-making process and how he reasons through balance between the importance of safety and then scaling really fast. So he's obviously engaged in right now a crazy juggling act on that level. So I'd love to get his thoughts on that. I'd also love to talk to David Deutsch. If you're not familiar with him, he's like, yeah, so I'm a physicist, so I have a strong bias towards interviewing physicists. But David Deutsch has this amazing book called The Beginning of Infinity, which you should definitely read. This is like, I don't know, it's like Harpreet talked about scaffolding, like intellectual scaffolding. This is a big piece of that, I think, for a lot of people in this kind of universe of physics meets machine learning. David Deutsch is also a bit of a skeptic on AI safety stuff. So I would love to understand better, why he thinks the way he does. So I think those would be my two.
Dude, I'm reading The Fabric of Reality right now. Oh, amazing, dude. That book is blow my mind. It's awesome.
Yeah, he's a great writer, eh?
Yeah.
I did just add The Beginning of Infinity to my reading list.
Yes. So. Yes.
All right, we're getting a little short on time, so I'm going to end with the final question here. And that is, what is your biggest takeaway from all these interviews that you've done? What advice would you give people about this field? Danny, we'll start with you here.
Just go for it. I think that would be the thing, that the main takeaway.
I love it. Perfectly concise because we're short on time. Love you for it, Danny. How about you, Sanyam?
I'll just echo that. There's no path, like we said. Just follow your passion and figure it out along the way.
Wonderful. What are your thoughts, Karen?
Don't focus on the job titles, but definitely on the role and responsibilities.
I love it. How about you, Jeremie?
Build interesting shit, and interesting people will come to you.
I love it. And Harpreet, what do you think?
Man, we live in an age of nearly infinite leverage where you don't need to ask permission to do anything. You can just go and fucking do it, right? Like, I didn't have to ask for permission to start a podcast. I didn't have to ask permission to create a award show. I just went and did it. So just to kind of piggyback off what Danny was saying, is just go for it. Just do it. There's no governing body that is there to say, yes, you can do that. No, you can't do that. If you feel like doing it, if you want to do it, just go do it, man.
I love that. If there are any questions coming in, I think we'll probably be able to take one or two questions. In the interim, I will talk about the thing that my biggest takeaway has been from all these experiences, and that's talking to people. Asking people and getting their experiences and learning from them. And it's something I think we've all done as people who interview other people in the space as podcasters. And some of the single best lessons that I've taken away is just from hearing other people's experiences, just learning from their mistakes or their successes. And just reaching out to someone else isn't overwhelmingly difficult to do. A lot of people really like talking about themselves. Surprise, surprise. And if you just kind of pull on some of those threads of what they're interested in, a whole new world opens up, and you just might learn something. It just might change your life as well. So, that would be hopefully my final nice way of tying all of this together, is that, hey, talk to people. You don't have to start a podcast, but anyone can have some sort of interaction with another person, whether it's calling them up on the phone, scheduling a Zoom, shooting them an email, getting into a group and sending a Slack message. I think that there's really something beautiful about that.
Including, I might add too, if you're like an introvert, I definitely qualify as one of those, but setting up a podcast is one of those awesome forcing functions. So you kind of like I would never reach out to somebody over, I don't know, Slack. Like, how would you even do that, right? But if you have an excuse, if you're like, hey, I'm doing this thing, let's talk about this thing. To your point, Ken, you find something that other person's built that you can use as a hook. They're very rarely going to turn you down, and then you have this call with an interesting person, and like they'll have a network, and you'll be able to work that over too. So yeah, I think for introverts, this is like, it's a good way to force you into doing something that's a good idea anyway.
Dude, I absolutely agree with that. Because like the only time people ever see me is when I'm speaking. When you don't see me, you don't know how quiet I am and just how much I don't talk.
He recedes back into a shell.
Yeah, I'm just like, yeah. But yeah. I mean, definitely. I mean, through podcasting, as an introvert myself, a severe introvert, I've had more conversations in the last year with more people than I've ever had in my entire life. Because prior to that, I probably only talked to like 5 people on a regular basis. Now that has expanded like tremendously. So guys, by the way, get your questions, get them coming in. Right now is a golden opportunity for all of you sitting there to take a screenshot let's all smile for the camera. Let's take a screenshot, post this on LinkedIn, post this on all your favorite social media platforms, tag all of us, hashtag DSGO virtual, yeah, hashtag data science as well. Ken, I'll turn it back to you. Are there any questions?
If there aren't any questions coming in, the last thing is to make sure to check out the podcasters and the actual podcasts that are here. So obviously we have Chai Time Data Science, we have the Women in Data podcast, Data with Danny, the Artists of Data Science, Towards Data Science, and Ken's Nearest Neighbors. So most of us have interviewed each other. Karen, I still have to get you on my show.
Yeah, I was just making notes in the background here.
Yeah, but for anyone, like if you enjoyed this, there's so much more information and so much more specific information across all these podcasts. There's also plenty more podcasts, but not all of them agreed to come on this, so they're just missing out. So,
and what I think is really interesting is like we're definitely all diverse people. Are different people with different interests, and I think our podcasts, our shows, the way we conduct our interviews will naturally lead you along with us on our journey as we chase ideas that are fascinating to us and try to share them with you guys.
Yeah, we're coming across 4 different continents. We were talking earlier. I mean, very different perspectives. It's just a beautiful thing. I mean, and that's what podcasting is about. It is about diversity and understanding the value that different people bring to this field, different mindsets, different experiences. And I'm glad everyone listening could share in with our diversity of experiences and perhaps condense that as well. So it doesn't look like there are any questions coming in. So I think we'll leave it. Danny, if we have time, moderators, if we have time, can Danny ask a question?
Please.
Yeah,
yes, we'll do it. We'll have one final question from Danny.
Okay, awesome. My time to take over. All right. So for all of the podcasters, what was the driving force to help you create your podcast? For someone like me, I've always wanted to create a legit podcast and put it up on all of the different Spotify and blah, 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 all the different places. But what was the impetus to get you to make that happen? Let's see. We can start with Harpreet.
I just was curious. I wanted to help people, and I just wanted to do something. I knew that I, couldn't just not do anything. There was just a moment where it just something fire lit inside me. This idea took hold of my mind, and the next thing I know, I had a podcast with guests booked, with the all that stuff. So yeah, it was just an idea took hold in the very, very back of my mind, somewhere back here, and then just consumed all of my thinking. So that's what happened with me.
Amazing. All right, maybe we'll go around the corner. So Ken.
Sure. So honestly, as I was growing more on YouTube, I started having conversations with so many incredible people in the data community, whether it's across LinkedIn, whether it's just people I met on the street, whatever it might be. And I was learning so much from these conversations that I realized, hey, why don't I record these? Why don't I find a way to be able to share these things with other people? Because I'm getting so much value out of them. And the nice thing about podcasting in that format is if you just record a conversation, the editing, a lot of this other stuff, the overhead is so much less than making a YouTube video for me, that it's a very efficient form of creating really valuable content. And I love that. And I love that I can share my conversations, my talks, whatever new things that I learned really quickly with the broader group.
Awesome. Amazing, Ken. Jeremie?
Yeah, I think that's an awesome question. And it speaks to some of the things that we've been discussing, kind of like the ways to self-improve. I know Harpreet was talking a lot about that growth mindset. In my case, it was pretty selfish. It was just like I recognized that I was an introvert and I wasn't going to have these conversations any other way. And so I've kind of been forcing myself for most of my the last 5 years of my life to enter situations that make me intrinsically uncomfortable. And this was definitely one of them. And then over time, you kind of, you practice it and you learn a lot from your guests, and you start to realize, oh man, I don't think I can stop doing this, because if I did, there'd be this sudden cessation of inbound information, and I would have to live with whatever I've got right now, which, by the way, for anybody listening, is not very impressive. So in order to stay away from that, I keep doing it. I think that's where we're at right now.
Awesome. And Karen?
For me, it's a bit of a mix of Ken and Jeremie, although a different way from Jeremie. So obviously, I do not have a YouTube channel like Ken, but I was having at conferences and sometimes, networking events, all these very interesting conversations, and I felt like everybody should benefit from them. So I decided to put them out there so that people who were maybe a bit too shy to ask the questions. I'm an introvert myself, but I am not shy. So I would just go and ask my question. So for those who were not feel confident enough to ask the question, I wanted them to be able to have access to the conversation and the content. So that's what drove me to do that.
Awesome. And lucky last, Sanyam.
So I like challenging myself, and this was a side hobby that really took over my life, creating content. I call myself a content creator, which means that I have no clue what I'm doing. I just put out content. I started by interviewing people on my blog post, and back then I was doing one blog per week. I ended up doing 25 interviews. Among other things, I also used to write about deep learning. I wanted to challenge myself, so I decided I'll do 2 podcasts every week, sharp at 9 a.m. Pacific, no exceptions for an entire year. Ended up doing 150 of those. But really, it's about the conversations that I end up having, and it's really getting to know the person as an excuse. Can I get Danny's 1 hour of time, which is really valuable? He probably won't give it to me. But if I ask him to share this journey with the entire community, I'm hoping he might say yes. That's the real reason.
Love it.
Amazing.
Perfect. Well, again, thank you everyone for coming in. Next time when we do an in-person conference, we'll all get together and grab some chai. I think that'll be a lot of fun. Thank you to all the guests. Thank you for our special guest, Harpreet, for coming in and joining us. And I hope everyone got a lot out of this, enjoyed it. Thank you again. And until next time, right?
Right on, man. Thank you very much, guys. Make sure you guys have screenshotted this wonderful site. Hashtag DSGO virtual, tag myself, tag everybody else. Let's spread the word. And just before we wrap on to our next and final presentation, I think something that Jeremie said reminded me of something Seneca, who's a Stoic philosopher, wrote in one of his letters, and it is, "Nothing will ever please me, no matter how excellent or beneficial, if I must retain the knowledge of it to myself. And if wisdom were given to me under the express condition that it must be kept hidden and not uttered, I should refuse it. No good thing is pleasant to possess without friends to share it with." So I'm glad I was able to share this time with you and able to share all the learnings. Yeah, all the learnings. Hey, shout out to Seneca. Shout out to Seneca for that one. All right, guys. Hey, thank you so much for hanging out, everybody. Let's keep the party moving.